The wind had become so loud that Emma could no longer hear her own footsteps. Snow whipped across the empty valley, striking her face like tiny pieces of ice. Her fingers had gone numb nearly an hour ago, and every breath felt painfully cold inside her chest. She could barely see 10 feet ahead. She didn't know how much farther she had to walk.
They'll find me.
She only knew that if she stopped moving, she might not start again. Then, through the white darkness, she saw something. A light. At first, Emma thought she was imagining it. But there it was again. A small, warm yellow glow in the distance. A cabin. She tightened her arms around herself and forced her frozen legs forward. The wind pushed against her. Her boots sank deep into the snow. She stumbled once, caught herself, and kept going. When she finally reached the wooden porch, she could barely lift her hand. She knocked. Nothing. She knocked again. Then the door slowly opened. A tall man stood on the other side. He was wearing a thick brown coat, worn boots, and an old cowboy hat. Behind him, a fire burned inside a stone fireplace. His eyes moved from her face to her snow-covered clothes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the man quietly said, "You're going to freeze out here." Emma tried to answer, but her lips were trembling too badly. The cowboy stepped aside. "Come in." And that simple decision would change both of their lives. The man's name was Daniel Carter. He had lived alone on that remote ranch for almost 8 years. His nearest neighbor was more than 12 miles away. There were no streetlights, no stores, no traffic, just mountains, pine trees, open fields, and during winter, more snow than most people could imagine. Daniel had learned to live with the silence. In fact, he preferred it. Years earlier, he had lost his younger brother in an accident. After that, Daniel slowly withdrew from the world. He stopped visiting town unless necessary. He stopped accepting invitations. And eventually, he stopped expecting anyone to knock on his door. Until that night. He closed the door behind Emma and immediately walked toward the fireplace. "Sit down." Emma lowered herself onto a wooden chair. Daniel grabbed a thick blanket from a nearby shelf and wrapped it around her shoulders. Then he placed a kettle near the fire. "Can you drink something warm?" She nodded. He didn't ask questions. That was the first thing Emma noticed about him. He didn't demand an explanation. He didn't ask where she came from. He didn't ask why she had been walking through a blizzard alone. He simply helped. A few minutes later, he handed her a cup of warm tea. Emma held it between both hands. The heat slowly returned to her fingers. Daniel watched from across the room. "You should get some sleep." "I can't." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Daniel looked at her. "Why?" Emma stared into the fire. "Because they'll find me." Daniel remained silent. Outside, the storm howled against the walls. "Who?" he finally asked. Emma shook her head. "I don't know." It was an answer that made no sense. But Daniel didn't push. He simply added another piece of wood to the fire. "Then tonight, nobody is finding you." Emma looked at him. For the first time that night, she felt safe. By midnight, the storm had become even worse. Snow covered the windows completely. The road leading to Daniel's ranch had disappeared beneath several feet of snow. There was no way anyone was driving through that weather. Daniel checked the old radio in the kitchen. The weather report warned that the storm could continue until morning. Possibly longer. He returned to the living room. Emma was still awake. She was sitting near the fire, staring at the flames. "You should sleep," Daniel said. "I haven't slept properly in 3 days." Daniel paused. 3 days. Emma nodded. He didn't ask anything else. Instead, he walked to the small guest room. There's a bed in there. She looked at him. I can't pay you. I didn't ask you to. I don't have anywhere else to go. You don't need anywhere else tonight. Emma looked down. Thank you. Daniel nodded. Then he walked away. But before he reached the kitchen, Emma quietly said, Why are you helping me? Daniel stopped. For a moment, he looked toward the dark window. Because somebody should. Then he disappeared into the kitchen. Emma eventually fell asleep. And for the first time in days, she wasn't afraid. Morning came slowly. The storm had not stopped. Daniel woke before sunrise and walked outside to check the horses. The cold hit him immediately. Snow had reached the lower part of the barn doors. He cleared a path and checked the animals. Everything was fine. When he returned to the cabin, Emma was standing near the window. She looked different. Still tired. Still frightened. But warmer. More human. Daniel poured coffee. You want some? She nodded. He handed her a cup. For several minutes, they stood in silence. Then Emma said, My name is Emma. Daniel looked at her. Daniel. I know. He raised an eyebrow. You told me last night. She smiled faintly. It was the first time he had seen her smile. And strangely, it stayed in his mind. Emma looked toward the storm. I wasn't supposed to come here. Where were you supposed to go? Denver. Why didn't you? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out an old photograph. Daniel looked at it. There was a young woman standing beside a small boy. The photograph was faded. Who are they? My mother and my brother. Daniel looked at Emma. What happened? My mother died last year. Emma's voice became quieter. And my brother disappeared 6 months ago. Daniel didn't say anything. Emma continued. He left behind a letter. She unfolded a small piece of paper. It had one name on it. Daniel waited. Your name? Daniel's expression changed. My name. Emma nodded. Daniel Carter. The room suddenly felt much quieter. Outside, the wind continued to howl. But Daniel barely heard it. Daniel stared at the photograph again. I don't understand. Neither did I. Emma took a breath. My brother had been searching for someone. He said that person had helped our family years ago. Daniel's eyes remained fixed on the photograph. What was your brother's name? Thomas. Daniel froze. He slowly sat down. Thomas. Emma nodded. Do you know him? Daniel looked toward the fireplace. Then he remembered. A boy. 17 years old. Cold. Hungry. Lost. Daniel had met him years earlier in a small town. He had given him food and helped him find a place to stay. But that had been almost a decade ago. Daniel had never thought about it again. Thomas was your brother. Emma nodded. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Why didn't he tell me? He tried. Emma's eyes filled with tears. He wrote you several letters. Daniel looked at her. I never received them. He thought you ignored him. Daniel looked toward the window. For years, he had believed that helping people was something small. Something forgotten. He had no idea that a simple act from his past had remained in someone's heart for years. Emma wiped her eyes. My brother wanted to find you. Why? He said you were the only stranger who had ever helped him without asking for anything. Daniel said nothing. The words affected him more than he expected. That afternoon, the storm became dangerous again. The temperature dropped sharply. Daniel checked the generator. It was running, but fuel was limited. He calculated how much they had left. Maybe 2 days. Maybe less. Emma noticed his expression. "What's wrong?" "We need to conserve fuel." "Can we leave?" Daniel looked outside. "No." "Then what do we do?" "We wait." The cabin became quieter. Daniel brought more wood inside. Emma helped organize the supplies. Neither of them talked much. But something had changed. They were no longer strangers. They worked together. They cooked together. They kept the fire alive. And as the hours passed, Emma began telling Daniel about her life. She told him about her mother, about Thomas, about growing up in a small house where money was always tight. She told him how Thomas had always dreamed of traveling, how he wanted to become a photographer, how he carried an old camera everywhere. Daniel listened. He never interrupted. When Emma finished, she looked at him. "Do you ever regret living here alone?" Daniel stared at the fire. "Sometimes." "Why stay?" He took a long breath. "Because leaving felt harder." Emma understood. She didn't ask him to explain. She simply said, "I think I know what you mean." That night, the storm finally began to weaken. The wind became quieter. Snow still fell, but gently. Daniel stepped outside with a lantern. Emma followed him to the porch. The entire valley was covered in white. Everything looked untouched. Beautiful. Silent. Emma looked around. "I've never seen anything like this." Daniel smiled. "You came during the worst possible week." She smiled. "Maybe the best." Daniel looked at her. She immediately looked away. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Emma said, "When I first saw your cabin, I thought I was imagining it. I almost didn't hear you knock. What made you open the door?" Daniel thought about it. "I don't know." Emma smiled. "I do." "What?" "You were supposed to." Daniel laughed softly. It was a sound Emma hadn't expected. And somehow it made the cold night feel warmer. The next morning, the storm had finally passed. Daniel walked outside. The sky was turning blue. For the first time in 2 days, sunlight touched the mountains. Emma stood beside him. Neither wanted to talk about what came next, because they both knew she would eventually have to leave. Daniel had a truck. The road would take several hours to clear. But eventually, she could return to town. She could continue searching for answers about Thomas. And Daniel would return to his quiet ranch. At least, that was what they both expected. Before leaving, Emma handed Daniel the old photograph. "Keep it." He looked confused. "Why?" "Because you were part of his story." Daniel stared at the picture. Then he looked at Emma. "I think you are too." Emma smiled. Several weeks passed. Spring slowly began to replace winter. The snow melted from the fields. The roads opened. Life returned to the ranch. But Daniel noticed something strange. The cabin felt quieter than before. He had lived alone for 8 years. He had been comfortable with silence. But now he realized something. Silence wasn't always peace. Sometimes silence was simply loneliness that had lasted too long. One evening, Daniel was repairing a fence when he heard a vehicle approaching. He looked toward the road. A small truck stopped near the ranch. The door opened. Emma stepped out. Daniel stared at her. She smiled. "I thought you might need some help." Daniel looked at the empty fence, then back at her. "I've been repairing fences for years." "I know. Then why are you here?" Emma walked closer. "Because I don't think either of us should be alone anymore." Daniel smiled. For once, he didn't know what to say. So he simply opened the ranch gate, and Emma walked through. Months later, the old cabin looked different. There were flowers near the porch, a second chair beside the fireplace, 2 coffee cups on the kitchen table, and on the wall was the old photograph of Thomas. Daniel never forgot the boy he had helped years earlier. And Emma never forgot the night a lonely cowboy opened his door during the worst snowstorm of her life. Sometimes people imagine heroes as men who perform extraordinary acts. But Daniel never thought of himself as a hero. He didn't fight anyone. He didn't save the world. He didn't do anything that would make the newspapers. He simply opened a door. He gave a freezing stranger a blanket. He kept a fire burning through the night. He listened when she needed someone to listen. And perhaps that was the real lesson. Sometimes a person doesn't need someone to change the entire world. Sometimes they just need one person willing to open a door when the world outside has become too cold. That night, Emma had been freezing alone in a snowstorm. She thought she was walking toward a cabin. She didn't know she was walking toward a new beginning. And Daniel thought he was simply helping a stranger survive the night. He didn't know he was opening the door to a life he had forgotten was possible. A life filled with warmth, with trust, with love, and finally, with someone waiting for him when the sun went down. Because sometimes the greatest heroes aren't remembered for the battles they won. They are remembered for the doors they opened, and the people they refused to leave behind. This was Legacy Heroes.